Today in the church is essentially a day of quiet, a day of reflection and anticipation, a day when we prepare to celebrate the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, reminds us that, quote, on the first Holy Saturday, the disciples didn't know that Easter was coming, that new life was on the way, end quote. They had to go through the utter darkness, the grief and pain of Saturday before the resurrection on Sunday. Holy Saturday is referenced in each of the Gospels. However, it is St. Luke who offers some details. Luke writes, as his body was taken away, the women from Galilee followed and saw the tomb where his body was placed. Then they went home and prepared spices and ointments to anoint his body. But by the time they were finished, the Sabbath had begun, so they rested as required by the law. Owing to the Jewish law, it would have been illegal for the women to proceed to return to Christ's body and to anoint it with the oils and spices that they had prepared, because it was the Sabbath. St. Luke continues in his narrative to say that once the Sabbath was over, the women did attempt to go and honor Christ's body again, but in so doing, they discovered that the body was not there. So on this Holy Saturday, when our isolation and our distancing from each other is very, very real, we are offered an uncommon opportunity to observe the Sabbath as a time to refrain from the customary frenetic preparations for the Easter celebration, and instead to observe a time when quite intentionally we rest and abide in God's presence, knowing and trusting in God's grace and mercy so generously bestowed on us through the life and teaching of the Rabbi of Nazareth. The first hymn this evening is hymn number 458. The 17th century cleric and hymn writer Samuel Crossman has given us, in My Song is Love Unknown, a particularly beautiful statement on the true meaning of love as exemplified in the life of Jesus Christ. It is quite possible that the phrase love unknown in the opening line is derived from George Herbert's allegorical poem by that title. Like Herbert, Crossman is among the host of metaphysical poets whose hyperbolic tone and rather intense literary technique associated with Renaissance love poetry were adapted to devotional purposes. Samuel Crossman had the unusual experience, after his graduation from Cambridge University, of serving as a minister in both Anglican and Puritan congregations simultaneously. Having some sympathy with the Puritan cause, Crossman was a participant in efforts to update the Book of Common Prayer so that both Puritans and Anglicans could use it. These efforts failed, and following the passage of what was known as the Act of Uniformity, Crossman was expelled along with nearly 2,000 other Puritan-leaning ministers from the Church of England. Crossman, however, in short order, renounced his Puritan affiliations and was ordained a priest and eventually became Dean of Bristol Cathedral. The composer of the music for this hymn, John Ireland, an English composer and a teacher of music who was born in the late 19th century and lived and worked into the mid-20th century. His sublime and highly lyrical music was composed expressly and especially for these words of Crossman. Ireland is said to have done this in the space of half an hour on request from a musical colleague and friend. His music, Ireland's music, is sympathetic to Crossman's text and captures, I believe, the very essence of its meaning. Please join now in singing stanzas 1 and 4 of hymn 458, My song is love unknown. Stanza 1. Stanza 4. The music that I shall offer on this Holy Saturday was composed by Johann Gottfried Walther, a contemporary and distant relative of Johann Sebastian Bach. During the time that Bach was in Weimar, the two musicians became acquainted and developed a friendship. Walther was regarded as one of the most accomplished organ virtuosos of his generation, and his skills at improvisation and sight reading were legendary. Walther's primary teacher was Johann Bernhard Bach, also related to Johann Sebastian through both his mother and father. You might find this little anecdote interesting. Walther is said to have played a joke on Sebastian Bach by composing some music that he was certain that Bach could not read at sight. When the great Lutheran church musician attempted the piece, indeed, he faltered as was expected, causing great laughter from the guests at the party. Walther composed some music for the organ that were transcriptions of concertos for small orchestra. The piece I shall play is the slow movement of one of these transcriptions. It features a solo melody with much embellishment and ornamented figurations. Even as I play this on the modern Steinway piano, one can easily imagine it being played by a virtuoso player of the violin, the oboe, or the flute. So this is the second movement from a concerto in B minor by Johann Gottfried Walther. Certainly without question, this classic text of When I Survey the Wondrous Cross by the 18th century hymn writer, theologian, logician, and Congregationalist minister Isaac Watts is not only one of his finest works, but matched with the tune Rockingham, is recognized as one of the most deeply loved hymns of English-speaking congregations around the world. Watts included this text based on a verse from the 6th chapter of the letter to the Galatians in his Hymns and Spiritual Songs, published in London in 1707. Percy Dearmer, an English priest and liturgist as well, as a strong advocate of social justice, commented about this hymn with these words. Dearmer said, "When I survey the wondrous cross is not only the result of a moment of inspiration for Watts, but also it has been a great source of inspiration for countless Christians, both in life and at the hour of their death." Having been first published in London in 1790, the hymn tune Rockingham first appeared in the United States in the Salem Collection of Classical Sacred Music, published here in Boston in 1805. The fine tune exudes warmth and is one of the finest of its period, its complex origin notwithstanding. Please join me in singing stanzas 1 and 4 of hymn 474, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. I invite you to join Christ Church later this evening for a virtual vigil, great vigil of Easter on Zoom.